Welcome to our classroom. In this space, we talk about education, which is inclusive of, but not limited to, what happens in schools. Education is taking place whenever and wherever we are willing to learn. I am your host, Roberto Germán, and our classroom is officially in session.
Welcome back to our classroom. Roberto here with Lorena, who is running a little bit late.
You don't gotta add that piece.
You know, I gotta tell the people the truth.
Hello, everyone. I am right on time.
You know, we gotta be authentic. And so this is gonna be your last episode for a while based on your tardiness.
Oh my goodness.
I'm just being real with you. This is part 3 of multilingual speakers in the U.S. Gonna go ahead and dive right in. Hopefully y'all have been engaging in this conversation and carrying it to different spaces. So we got a couple questions we want to unpack today, and let's go ahead and start with the first one. How does a humanizing approach to bilingual education contribute to creating a respectful and dignified learning environment for students and their families?
You keep giving me these very big and broad questions, thinking that they're short. That's huge.
Listen.
That's like the premise for a PhD.
Well, we don't need that right now, all right?
Goodness.
All we got to do is give the people a taste, feed them a little bit. If they want more, they can continue listening, or they can reach out to us for further resources and conversations. They can comment, so on and so forth.
How does a humanizing approach to bilingual ed contribute? I don't know that it contributes. I think it is the foundation for a respectful and dignified learning environment.
Say more.
Like, you cannot have a respectful and dignified learning environment for these particular students and their families if you don't see them as human. If you don't understand that they come first before these learning goals and these learning targets, right? They are more than what they can and cannot say. Usually we're talking about English, right? So if I see the kids that I'm working with as deficient in a language, as illiterate in a particular language, as a score, right?
Yeah, we get so caught up in test scores that,
right,
for some people in some institution, that's what ends up happening.
Yeah.
Is that we start overlooking the human beings, right, that we are educating and just focus so much on the numbers, on the data.
And let me just say that I fell into something similar.
It's easy to fall into.
It's so easy to fall into. It is.
It's a trap.
Like, because one of the things that I had to do often was differentiate. You got one class, but I had all these different levels in this one class, or abilities and skill sets. But I had to go based off this standardized test. And I don't even want to make this about standardized testing. Let's not even call it that. Let's just say this test, right? We already talked
about that. We let it all out.
Yes, but my point here is not so much the test, but like the scores, right? And so I had in my mind, even though I wouldn't say this to them and I wouldn't even write it on their papers, I came up with like really creative ways of naming groups, like rock stars, superstars, and like whatever. And they were in alphabetical order. And in my mind, it was like level 1, level 2, level 3, right? But anyway, I had grouped them in a certain place, and that certainly influenced how I saw them and how I thought of them, what I believed they could and couldn't do. And when I finally caught myself, which was absolutely way too late in the school year, this was like years ago, I felt so terrible because I was like, man, I wonder what role I've played in limiting them. Right? Because when you keep them in these groups, sometimes they struggle to grow because they're limited to that work, to whatever you're giving that group. All of this is to say that when we see them through these lens of simply achievement, we do lose, what you were just saying, like the human in that space.
Yeah, for me, a simple way to think about this is, what are we doing and why are we doing it?
Yeah.
And who are we doing this for?
Yeah. Yeah, and we can even push it with some other questions too, like who benefits from what we're doing?
Right.
Who is this good for? Like, is this a thing that's going to be make my life easier.
Right, and what are we
which is
paying
not
for?
bad. Yeah.
Like, what are we paying for? Who are we paying? Where's the money
Yeah.
going? Follow the money.
Right, that too.
Because it's probably going to tell us a lot.
Yeah. Who is this that I'm doing, right? Like, who is this possibly excluding? Like, who is it leaving out, right? Et cetera.
Why?
And why? Yeah. So there's a lot of questions we can ask ourselves, but I
what
think,
are we to do about that, right?
Yeah.
That
Right,
ends
like,
up
what can
being
I do?
These are all great,
Yeah.
like, professional development questions.
Yeah.
You know, like, this would be not the way, but a way you could start the school year, right? Like, let's sit down and ponder these questions and
Yeah.
have a real, raw conversation that ultimately centers around our students and our practices, and hopefully challenge
Yeah.
and encourage us to make whatever necessary adjustments, and also to keep the good things that we're doing. So something for y'all, something for folks to consider as the school year starts winding down and folks transition into the summer and ultimately start preparing for the fall, for the 2024 school year, right? This is something for folks to consider.
Yeah. I think sometimes we think of humanizing approaches, or, whatever language we want to use around these different approaches, as like super complex and overhauling everything you're doing. And it's not always that. I mean, there are times where, you got to stop simply doing this one thing or change this one whole aspect of what you're teaching. That might be a thing. But it's also tweaks here and there. And it is also about your disposition and how you're walking in that room. Like, how am I approaching these children? How am I thinking about who they are, right? Like, how am I incorporating their values, or at least keeping in mind their values and their cultures and their backgrounds and even their families and communities,
Right, and how can I do that better? What supports do I need to be more effective in that?
Yeah.
What supports do I need from the school leaders? What supports do I need from my colleagues? What supports do I need from the caretakers, right? Parents and guardians.
Yeah.
Because this should be a collective effort. I dare to even ask, what supports do I need from the student?
Yeah.
Right? Because then it gives the opportunity for the student to voice, like, all right, well, this is how I can partner with you.
Sure.
And it also gives the student ownership of their own educational journey. And so, transitioning to our next question, what role do community and family engagement play in supporting students of color in their language learning journey? And how can educators foster meaningful partnerships? Right? This was a good segue.
Again, a big question. I could literally think of 2 books right now, 3 books right now.
Name them.
So one is,
give the people some resources.
All right, so the one is obviously En Comunidad. They talk about this.
Yeah, well, we
already mentioned that one.
But
I'm
go
thinking
ahead.
about
Shout out to doctoras, the doctoras.
Yes.
Carla España, Luz Yadira Herrera.
All right. I'm thinking too of Dr. Professor Amigo Stephen Alvarez's book En Confianza.
Shout out to Stephen Alvarez.
Published by
Taco
NCTE.
Literacy.
That's right. Taco Literacy's
friend of the platform.
Right. His book. And also I'm thinking too, I mean, I haven't read it fully, but we featured her on our podcast and everything, in Naval's book. Like, I'm thinking of 3 books
Shout
immediately
out to Naval.
who are already talking about this, but you want me to answer this quickly, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, I want you to not give us the PhD version.
Golly.
We don't got time for that.
All right.
This is part 3 of this series. Come on.
Because this became a part. You thought this was going to be a one and done podcast, but you have these big questions. So I'm
I'm not going to lie. I did.
My goodness.
Yeah,
all right, here we are.
By the way, Naval's book, Naval Karuni, Nurturing Caregiver Collaboration.
Isn't it nourishing?
Nourishing. That's, I'm
nourishing. I knew
nourishing.
that part.
I was playing pickleball this morning.
Yeah, you're
tired. It was
tired.
hot. I'm tired.
You're tired.
Nourishing No, I can't even say it
Ay,
right.
Dios mío.
Nourishing caregiver collaborations. And Naval was on the platform, as was Steven, as was Skylar and Lou. So y'all could go back and check those episodes to get insight about not just their books, but the topics that we were unpacking. All right, go ahead.
So you don't feel well? Do you need a hug?
Go ahead.
All right. So
You want me to reiterate the question?
yes, please.
What role do community and family engagement play
Yeah.
in supporting students of color in their language learning journey,
Right.
and how can educators foster meaningful partnerships?
Okay. Good. What role? They play a crucial central role, right? Like you or me, us, we.
Who are we, the community?
No, the educators, or even the school, right? Like my point is that we have to do this in partnership with the home. One of the biggest issues that teachers have,
And the community.
and admin. I'm going to get to the community in a second, but one of the main issues that we have in terms of effective school days, effective learning environments, is how disconnected school and home feel. Mm-hmm. And that's a realistic gap because schools have done that for a long time.
True.
Right? And in their design, in the United States, schools were about taking these kids of color away from parents. And so they were designed to keep us out. So unless we are innovative and intentional about bridging that gap, it is just simply not going to come naturally. So that's one thing, right? And so when we do that, when we bridge that gap, when we make those relationships, when we have these conversations with parents, we have to understand the students' cultural backgrounds, their families' values, so that we can talk about how are we going to come together to support this person, right, this learner, in their language learning journey. We have to build and communicate. And are there strategies? I'm sure we could all come up with them. But some of them are like, maybe we print posters that parents can have up at home that are bilingual, sharing kind of what are some things they can do at home. Maybe there are little index cards that we send home to parents that they can use to practice the new language with their kids at home, right? Like there's a number of different things that we can do that makes it interactive and playful and helps to build relationship. One of the fears of like particularly immigrant parents from the Caribbean and other Spanish-speaking languages is that their kid at home...
Spanish-speaking countries, you mean?
What did I say?
Spanish-speaking languages.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Spanish-speaking countries. Is that the fear is that at home, my kid is going to stop speaking Spanish.
Right.
And so what if at home, we can still communicate and we can do this together. We can practice Spanish and we can practice English, right? Just as a supplement to what's happening during the day, but that it doesn't take over. And so... what role do they play? You can't do it effectively without them, period. And then there's community engagement, right? Or the community, like how do we embed the community? And again, I have to point to texture teaching because I break that part down. There are ways for us to be reaching out and infusing what's going on out there in here,
Well, what are those ways? I read the book, but...
Right, I was about to say, like...
I read the book.
Ay, Dios mío.
I also listened to the audiobook.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm not saying tell us all the ways.
Okay.
But, you got to tell the people something.
All right. Okay, so some of the ways to welcome community. Well, first of all, we can get some, important community members like the, mayor, or a city rep, or the librarian, right? Like these local roles, they can come in to do a lesson on English, right? To teach, like, what does this one word mean? Or what does this what is love to you? Oh, and they can come in and they can talk to us in English and we can have a conversation back and forth as a class, right? Like I just feel like sometimes we're so boxed in by standards, by the performance of schooling that we forget about interactive education, that we forget about simply just like having some fun and being thoughtful and meaningful and inclusive in really original ways. And I'll say that I've seen, like, you know, as teachers continue to embed texture teaching in their classrooms and you know, try these different approaches, and they're sharing some of the things that they're doing, it's very encouraging. And I'm like, wow, I would have never even thought of that myself, right? And so I love the ways that folks bring in their selves and their own ideas and tailor it to their communities, you know?
Yeah, I know Jessica Vilas Novas, who used to be director of the Lawrence Public Library in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and is now serving in a different capacity. But I know she was doing some great work over there, and that work's been continued by Janelle Abreu and Tianisha Torres. And I know they're, and I'm not saying this is without struggle,
right?
But I know they have been intentional about offering literacy programs for the community, giving support that they need, bilingual programs. Also, they've been intentional of trying to work with the schools in the city, and I love to see the schools be even more responsive, more engaged, and think about, like, you know, how can we better leverage the local library as a resource. Another thing that comes to mind for me, something I saw recently, was there's a local Boys and Girls Club. I think it's the Boys and Girls Club in Brandon. And there was
Here in Florida.
Here in Florida, yeah. And there was something I seen about a literacy program that they have here, which also now makes me think about the Boys and Girls Club in Lawrence, and we know about the literacy program that they have over there in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And so I think there's some wonderful things happening in some of these community spaces
all around the country,
where we could connect the school, connect the students, connect the parents, and there could be some wonderful collective efforts that extend themselves beyond the normal hours of the school day.
Yeah. For sure. And those are really easy and concrete ways to bring in community elements into the classroom, you know, in terms of partnering with these different people. And then what happens is that these young people are rocking around their city or participating in after school programs. And it's like, oh, it's the same people. There's connections here, right? Like, I already, not only do I feel okay, but you already know what I'm doing and what I've been working on, you know? And so then it becomes, then it really does feel like I have a whole community around me working with me to learn this new language or to practice, you know, and to develop more skills.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, folks, for tuning in. Keeping it short and sweet. This was our series on multilingual speakers in the U.S. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out. Multiculturalclassroom.com. You already know. Learning any final words before your long hiatus on being on the show? Oh my gosh,
I'm going to be back. I vow to return soon enough. It's been great chatting with you all. Thanks.
Peace.
As always, your engagement in our classroom is greatly appreciated. Be sure to subscribe, rate the show, and write a review. Finally, for resources to help you understand the intersection of race, bias, education, and society, go to multiculturalclassroom.com. Peace and love from your host, Roberto Germán.